A reading from John's Gospel. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law of Moses, it commands us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him, so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the elders, there was no one left. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on do not sin again." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm not sure my microphone's working, is it? It is. Oh, good. Several years ago, my spouse Colette and I were traveling in Washington, D.C., and as you know, there are so many wonderful places to visit in our capital city. And on one of our stops, we were over at the National Archives, which had this wonderful display of Lincoln documents on loan from the Library of Congress. Now, what you have to realize is when you walk into the National Archives, there are many of our famous founding documents carefully preserved and out in full view for the public. But what caught my eye more than the famous documents were some of these simply written, handwritten letters by President Lincoln during his presidency. And one such letter caught my eye. It was a letter written on behalf of a soldier by the name of Roswell McIntyre. Roswell McIntyre was barely a man, still a boy, when he was drafted into the New York Cavalry. And with very little training, he was sent into his first battle. He got scared and he ran off. Well, of course, he was found, he was court-martialed, and he was scheduled to be shot to die for his treason to his country. Well, God bless his mother, God bless all mothers. She took up his case, and she took that case all the way to President Lincoln, pleading on behalf of her son to give this boy a second chance. We are told that Lincoln took the matter under advisement. He prayed about it. He spoke to others about it. His generals, his commanders were saying to him, "President Lincoln, you cannot forgive this boy. If you do it for him, you will have many other cases, and that we're in the midst of this brutal war where father fights against son, and you will have more cases if you grant leniency here." Lincoln thought and prayed some more, and then finally he wrote this very short and powerful letter. "I have found," wrote Lincoln, "that it never does a boy much good to shoot him." And with this letter under my hand, Roswell McIntyre when he serves out his full enlistment, shall be freed of any and all charges of desertion against him. Signed, President Abraham Lincoln. There's a little note to the side of the letter that says, this letter was taken off the body of Roswell McIntyre at the Battle of Little Five Forks, Virginia. The story teaches us many things, but one of the things it teaches us is the power of grace. Roswell McIntyre was able to save face. He was able to re-enlist and rejoin a unit that he had run away from because his president believed in him, because his president showed him leniency and grace, and that grace empowered him to go on and give it all, his life, in the midst of that battle. Grace is powerful. We discover the power of that grace in our gospel text today, a text filled with much anxiety, a text in which the religious establishment is anxious and nervous over the ministry of the Jesus movement, an establishment that is ready to defend itself and stone another at all cost to try to save itself. But the Jesus movement, on the other hand, was different. It was reaching out to those who needed a second chance. It was reaching out to those who were hurting and those who were living on the edges and the margins and saying, come and join this way of beloved community where we are working for justice. We're experiencing compassion in the midst of oppression. Come and join the way. It's never too late. A place where there's hope. A place where there's second chances. And my hunch is the woman in our story today took that offer. I bet she was hungry. She was searching. And it's that kind of grace, I believe, if we can discover it again in the church, the Jesus movement of grace, that people will flock to. I believe people are just as hungry for this form of Jesus grace as they were 2,000 years ago. And if we want people in our pews again, we somehow have to be in that Jesus movement again, offering this kind of transforming grace in the midst of oppression, in the midst of injustice. And instead, well, maybe we become exactly what Jesus was working against in the first century. Instead of we as the religious institution being in bed with the empire, maybe it's time that we once again search out those on the margins, those who are hungry for this kind of grace. I'm convinced that one of the problems we have in the church today is that people do not see us as grace-filled. They see us as opposing. They see us as authority. They see us as the ones who will condemn them. Philip Yancey, in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace, tells the story of a friend of his who's in ministry in Chicago working among the homeless on behalf of the church. And one day he had a hurting woman come into their facility there and share her story of how she became addicted to crack cocaine, and in order to fuel that addiction, she turned to prostitution. She became pregnant and is now living on the streets with her daughter. And this friend of Yancey's, this counselor, turned to the woman and said to her, all around you are churches and people of faith and institutions of worship. Did you ever think about turning to them for help and assistance and community? Oh, no, she said. Why would I turn to them? I already feel bad enough about myself. they would make me feel worse. Most of those who live on the margins, those who are hurting, those most need of grace, do not right now see that the church has that ministry or that place. And that's sad because it was birthed here. It was founded here in the Jesus movement. At our very heart, that is our roots. And we must reclaim that. I had a wonderful moment of grace yesterday at my church at Marshalltown Hope. We had a scheduled baptism at our second service for a young man who's in our aftercare ministry. We've had several young men who, when they come to Marshalltown to the halfway house, we have a group in the church that adopts them, takes them under their wing, supports them, makes them part of the beloved community of hope. And so we had this baptism scheduled, and folks on that team, risked their lives getting to church to the second service because this baptism had to go on. Tristan has new life. He's figured out this grace thing, and he is hungry for it. And he is reaching out with all that his might to this kind of Jesus grace. And let me tell you, it is something to have an individual standing before you that takes those vows and they have tears in their eyes because they're hungry for that grace. Who enters the waters of baptism and comes up with tears in their eyes because this isn't just a sacrament of the church. This is experiencing the divine grace that we all crave. And it was so wonderful to see one of the persons on the journey out a little ahead of him, a couple years, being up there sponsoring him, and these two guys who have seen a lot in this life, embracing and crying together at the baptismal font. That's grace. That's Jesus' grace. That's empowering grace. And I believe, my friends, if we can follow that way once again in the church today, that people will flock to that kind of grace, mercy, and love once again. The empowerment of grace. Not judgment. Open grace. Jesus walking, picking people up out of the dirt that others had told are unclean and don't have a chance. But they found that second chance in Jesus. And empowering grace. Amen.